My world ended 3 winters ago. It didn't end with a bang. It ended with a silence. The kind of silence that's so heavy it feels like you're drowning in it. The silence left behind when a wife's laughter and a son's questions are stolen by a fever that respects no one. My name is Arthur Blackwood, and this ranch, carved into the lonely foothills, became my tomb. I live by a rhythm: chop wood, mend fence, feed cattle, eat, sleep, repeat. Each swing of the axe was a prayer for forgiveness. Forgiveness for the crime of breathing when Martha and my boy Daniel were not. Grief, I learned, isn't an emotion. It's a weight. You feel it in the empty side of the bed. You see it in a pair of scuffed up little boots you can't bring yourself to throw away. It turns a man to stone. The nearby town of Redemption was a place I avoided. Too many pitying eyes. Too many clumsy words that felt like salt in a wound that would never heal. I preferred the company of my herd. They asked for nothing but grass and gave no judgment. My property line was a creek, a silver ribbon of ice-cold water tumbling down from the peaks. It was my fence against the world, my own little slice of purgatory. And that's where my story, my real story, begins. It was a blistering August afternoon. The sun was a hammer, beating the dust out of the dry earth. The air was thick with the drone of insects. I was heading to the creek to fill my water buckets, a chore I'd done 1,000 times. The squeak of the leather handles was part of the silence. But then, a new sound cut through the day. A splash, not the panicked thrashing of a deer. Something softer, slower. I froze. My hand, calloused and hard from years of work, tightened around the wooden handle of the bucket. Trespassers were rare out here, but not impossible. I moved like a ghost through the willows that lined the bank, my feet making no sound on the packed earth. I parted the branches, slow and careful. And then I saw her. A woman was in the middle of my creek, the water dark and rushing, swirled around her shoulders. Her back was to me. Her hair, a tangled mess of brown, was piled on her head. She was washing herself, but with a kind of desperate weariness, like she was trying to scrub away more than just dirt, like she was trying to scrub away her own skin. On the bank was a pathetic little bundle of clothes, ripped and worn. A hot spike of anger shot through me. This was my land, my water, my solitude. How dare she? I opened my mouth to shout, to send her running, but the word died in my throat. I saw the sharp, jutting angle of her shoulder blades. They looked like the wings of a broken bird. And then I saw it, a dark, ugly bruise blooming like a poison flower across her left shoulder. The sight choked the anger right out of me, replaced it with something complicated. I wasn't looking at a trespasser anymore. I was looking at a creature that had been hunted, cornered, and left for dead. I stayed hidden, a silent watcher on my own land. She finally turned, dipping her head to rinse her hair, and I saw her face. It was all sharp bones and shadows, a face that might have been beautiful once, before hunger and fear had carved it up. My mind was a war zone. The rancher, the hermit I'd become, wanted her gone. But the man I used to be, the man who was Martha's husband, Daniel's father, felt a pull, a reluctant pity. She started wading to the bank, her movements slow, pained. I saw her flinch when she put weight on her left foot. That's when I made my choice, a choice that would set my world on fire. I stepped out from behind the willows. I didn't say a word. I just let her see me. Her head snapped up. Her eyes went wide. It wasn't just fear I saw. It was pure animal terror, the kind you see in a rabbit just before the fox strikes. She scrambled for the bank, clutching her thin, wet chemise to cover herself, her breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. "This is private land," I said. My voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. It had been a while since I had used it for anything other than talking to my horse. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling so hard I could barely hear it over the rushing water. "I saw the water. I didn't mean no harm. I'll be going." She tried to stand, to gather her rags, but a sharp wince of pain shot across her face. She sank back down, her hand instinctively going to her ankle. I looked at her frightened face, at the ugly bruise on her shoulder, at the ankle she was trying so hard to hide. I thought of the empty barn, full of hay, I thought of the sacks of dried beans in my larder, and I thought of Martha. Martha would have been down here in a heartbeat with a blanket and a kind word and a warm meal. The thought was a knife in my gut, a fresh wave of guilt for the man I'd become. Against every instinct for isolation I had built up over 3 long years, I let out a heavy sigh. Sun'll be down in an hour, I grunted, my tone still gruff. Storm's coming from the west. You can take shelter in the barn, but you're to be gone by sunrise. I turned and walked away before she could answer, before I could change my mind. I didn't look back, but I could feel her stunned, weary eyes on my back all the way to the cabin. That night the storm broke with a terrible fury. The wind howled like a banshee. The rain hammered on the roof. I lay awake, listening to the storm and listening to the silence. But it was a different kind of silence now. The perfect, painful equilibrium of my solitude had been disturbed. There was another heartbeat on my land, and I had no idea that the real storm was just beginning. The morning after the storm, the world felt washed clean. The air smelled of wet pine and damp earth. I expected her to be gone. I told her to be gone by sunrise, and I meant it. Still, something nagged at me. A ghost of the man I used to be, a sense of duty I thought I'd buried long ago. I brewed coffee, the bitter aroma of familiar comfort in the silent cabin. I poured a second cup into a tin mug. I found a day-old biscuit, hard as a rock but better than nothing. I carried them out to the barn, feeling like a fool. She was probably miles away by now, but she wasn't. I found her perched on the top rail of the corral fence, staring out at the mountains. She'd managed to wash and mend her dress. The crude stitches were a testament to her desperation. The clear morning light hit her face, now scrubbed clean of grime. And in that light, I could see her. Really see her. And that's when the world tilted on its axis. Recognition hit me like a physical blow. It knocked the air from my lungs. I had seen that face before, a few weeks back, on my last trip into Redemption for salt and flour. It had been tacked to the sheriff's notice board, a stark charcoal sketch on a piece of paper fluttering in the breeze. The high cheekbones, the shape of the eyes, the small faint scar just above her left eyebrow. It was her, Clara Hale, wanted, accomplice to the outlaw Garrison Vance, robbery of a stagecoach near Willow Creek. Reward, $200. The tin mug in my hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. $200. That was a fortune. It could buy a new bull. It could fix the leaking roof on the barn. It could see me through 2 hard winters without a worry. It was a solution, a clean, simple end to a problem I never asked for. All I had to do was get on my horse, ride to town, tell Sheriff McBride what and who was sitting on my fence. She turned then, sensing my approach. Her eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, were filled with a weary gratitude. She hadn't run. She had stayed, as if she were waiting for my judgment. "Thank you," she said softly, her gaze dropping to the coffee I held out. "For the shelter." I didn't say anything. I just stared at her. The wanted poster was burned into the back of my eyes. I saw the sketch, and then I saw the woman. The poster hadn't shown the bone-deep exhaustion that clung to her like a shroud. It hadn't captured the fear that lived in the back of her eyes. And as she shifted on the fence, pulling her thin dress tighter against the morning chill, I saw something else. Something the poster had definitely, absolutely omitted. A gentle, unmistakable swell to her abdomen. She was pregnant. The knowledge landed in the silent space between us, and it changed everything. $200. My mind was reeling. A fortune. But it was blood money now. I could turn her in. A pregnant woman. I imagined the bounty hunters with their smug, satisfied smirks. I imagined her in a cold, dark cell. And for a fleeting, terrible moment, I didn't see a criminal. I saw Martha in the early days of her pregnancy with Daniel, her face full of that same fragile, fierce hope. The comparison was a physical pain, a knife twisting in my heart. A wave of self-loathing so strong it almost buckled my knees washed over me. Who was I? What kind of man considered this? "I know who you are," I said. The words fell like stones into the quiet morning. The fragile gratitude in her face shattered. It was replaced instantly by that same raw terror I'd seen at the creek. She slid off the fence, stumbling backward. Her hands went instinctively to her belly, a primal gesture of protection. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's not what they say. I didn't. I wouldn't." I held up a hand, not as a threat, but to stop the flood of panicked words. I set the mug of coffee and the biscuit on the fence post between us. A chasm of silence opened up. I could hear the distant lowing of my cattle, the caw of a raven high on the wind. My whole world, my quiet, ordered, miserable world, had been turned upside down by this woman and the secret she carried. The simple path, turning her in, now seemed like a betrayal of Martha's memory, a betrayal of whatever last, buried piece of my own humanity was left. "The coffee will get cold," I said, my voice flat. I turned my back on her, on the wanted poster, on the $200 she represented. I walked toward the woodpile. The smooth, worn handle of my axe felt solid and real in a world that had suddenly become unstable. For now, I had made a choice. I didn't know if it was the right one, but it was the only one I could live with. For now, she would stay. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was only the beginning. The world wasn't just going to let her disappear, and by hiding her, I had painted a target on my own back. The days that followed fell into a strange, unspoken rhythm. We didn't talk about the wanted poster. She didn't offer any explanations. Her presence was a quiet weight in my solitary world, a constant, humming reminder of the choice I'd made. I gave her the small room that had been Daniel's. For 3 years, that door had remained locked, a shrine to a ghost. Unlocking it felt like breaking one of my own ribs, a sharp internal pain that took my breath away. But I did it. I watched as she cleaned the small room, her hands gentle as she wiped the thick layer of dust from the little wooden horse I'd carved for my son so long ago. The sight almost broke me. I put her to work, not out of cruelty, but because idleness felt dangerous. It was a breeding ground for the questions that hung thick and heavy in the air between us. She tended the small vegetable garden Martha had planted, her movements slow and careful, mindful of the life she carried. She mended my work shirts, her stitches neat and even, a stark contrast to my own clumsy attempts. We ate our meals in silence at the rough-hewn table, but it was a different kind of silence now. The space between us was charged with an awareness that slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to change from suspicion to something else. I couldn't put a name to it. I found myself watching her. I saw the way she would pause while weeding the garden, her hand resting on her belly. A look of such profound and troubled love on her face, it made my chest ache. I saw the deep weariness that sleep never seemed to touch. She was little more than a girl, really, thrust into a world far too cruel for her. One evening, as a bruised purple twilight settled over the valley, she finally spoke. "His name was Garrison Vance," she said to the table, her eyes fixed on the grain of the wood. "The man I was with." I stopped, my fork halfway to my mouth. I didn't say anything. I just waited. "He was handsome," she continued, her voice so low it was almost a whisper. "Charming. He promised me things. A different life, away from the dirt-poor farm I grew up on." Her voice was laced with a shame that was painful to hear. "But the charm, it was a mask. Underneath, he was cruel." She finally looked at me. "The robbery, I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know what he was planning. He told me we were just meeting a man. I was just there. When the shooting started, I ran. I've been running ever since." I saw the truth of her words in the slight tremor of her hands, in the haunted look that never quite left her eyes. "He said he loved me," she whispered, and a single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. "But love isn't supposed to leave marks." She unconsciously touched her shoulder, where the ugly bruise had finally started to fade to a sickly yellow-green. In that single quiet moment, the last of my judgment withered and died. I didn't see a criminal. I didn't see an accomplice. I saw a survivor. And something in me, some long-frozen part of my heart, began to thaw. "My wife's name was Martha," I heard myself say. The words felt strange on my tongue, like a foreign language I hadn't spoken in years. "My boy was Daniel. The fever took them in the winter of '84. It was the first time I had spoken their names to another living soul. The admission hung in the air between us, a fragile bridge built between two broken people. Clara, I finally let myself think her name, looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She didn't offer pity. She didn't say she was sorry for my loss. She just gave me a small, sad nod of understanding. And it was more comfort than I'd received in 3 years of well-meaning condolences. From that day on, the silence between us changed again. It was no longer the silence of suspicion or even quiet observation. It became a silence of companionship, a shared space. I found myself telling her about Daniel's obsession with frogs, about the way Martha's apple pie could make even the coldest winter day feel warm. In return, she told me about her childhood in Ohio, about her dream of one day seeing the ocean. We were two ghosts, slowly learning to haunt the same house together. I was beginning to realize I wasn't just sheltering a fugitive. I was sheltering a fragile budding hope. And in doing so, without even meaning to, I was starting to heal myself. But I was a fool to think it could last. I knew it. I felt it in my bones, like the promise of an early frost in the air. The world doesn't just forget about a woman with a price on her head, and the world was coming for us. The first sign of trouble rode in on a Tuesday. It came in the form of Sheriff McBride. He was a grizzled old lawman with kind eyes, a man who had known me since I was a boy. He'd known my father. He'd stood beside me at the graveside when I buried Martha and Daniel. His horse kicked up a lazy cloud of dust as he rode up the path to the cabin. My heart seized in my chest. It hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I met him on the porch. I positioned myself just right, blocking the view of the doorway. Inside, Clara was kneading dough for bread, her hands white with flour. "Arthur," McBride said, tipping his hat. He didn't dismount, which was unusual. He always dismounted for a cup of coffee. That was my first clue that this wasn't a social call. "Sheriff," I said, keeping my voice even. My face felt like a stone mask. "Just making my round," he said, his eyes scanning the property. "Wanted to give you a heads up. There's a bounty hunter in town, man named Shaw, asking a lot of questions." I felt a cold dread snake its way down my spine. "What kind of questions?" I asked, hoping I sounded casual. "About strangers, drifters," the sheriff said, and his gaze, shrewd and knowing, locked onto mine. "Anyone passing through who might not want to be found." He glanced past me, just for a fraction of a second, just long enough to see a flicker of movement inside the cabin, as Clara instinctively shrank back from the doorway. His eyes snapped back to mine. "He's particularly interested in that woman, the one from the stagecoach business over at Willow Creek, Clara Hale." The lie felt thick and clumsy in my mouth. "Haven't seen anyone." Sheriff McBride held my gaze for a long, heavy moment. A silent conversation passed between us. He saw the change in me. The hard shell was still there, but some of that profound, deathly stillness had gone from my eyes. He saw life in them again, and he was smart enough to wonder why. "Well," he said, finally gathering his reins, "you keep to yourself out here, Arthur, I know. But if you happen to see anything, this Shaw is a hard man, not one for subtleties." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "You take care, Arthur." He turned his horse and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and dread hanging in the summer air. I went back inside. Clara stood by the table, her hands frozen in the dough, her face as pale as the flour that covered them. She had heard everything. "He knows," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He knows something's different," I corrected her, my own voice grim. "And he's warning me." The unspoken threat hung between us. The bounty hunter, Shaw. He would come. It wasn't a question of if, but when. My ranch was no longer a sanctuary. It was a trap, waiting to be sprung. Every snap of a twig, every distant hoofbeat sent a jolt of ice-cold adrenaline through my veins. The stakes had been raised. It wasn't just Clara's freedom on the line anymore. It was mine, too. I was harboring a fugitive. I was an accomplice. The law would see me as no different than her. But as I looked at her, at the fear in her eyes warring with a new, fierce determination to protect the child she carried, I felt no regret. That long, dormant protective instinct, the one I thought had been buried with my son, was now a roaring fire in my chest. This woman and the child she carried had stumbled into my life and given me something I hadn't had in 3 years. A purpose beyond just survival. I had been living in a tomb of my own making, and she, this frightened fugitive, had inadvertently led me back into the world of the living, a world fraught with danger and consequence. That night, I didn't just check the loads in my rifle. I cleaned it, oiled it. I slept with a loaded shotgun by my bed. I was no longer just a rancher. I was a guardian, and I would protect my home, whatever the cost. The quiet peace didn't last. I knew it wouldn't. We were living on borrowed time, every sunset a small victory, every sunrise a fresh wave of anxiety. I started watching the ridgeline, my eyes scanning for any sign of a rider. I taught Clara how to use the shotgun, her hands trembling as she held the heavy weapon, but her eyes steady and determined. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but underneath it, a new layer of something harder had formed. We were in this together. One evening we were sitting at the table, the silence comfortable now. She reached into the collar of her dress and pulled out a thin silver chain. On it was a small, tarnished silver locket. She clicked it open. I expected to see a tiny portrait, maybe of her mother or father. But it wasn't a portrait. It was a small, folded piece of paper, yellowed and creased, and on the other side a tiny, intricately carved key. "This is why he's hunting me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not about me. It was never about me." "What is it?" I asked, leaning closer. "Proof," she said, her eyes dark. "And leverage. Vance. He wasn't working alone on that robbery. He had a partner, someone important. This is a letter from that partner, detailing the whole plan. Vance was keeping it as insurance, blackmail, in case things went sideways. And the key. It's to a locked box in a bank in Dusty Creek," she breathed. "It's where they stash the money. My share, he called it. But it was just another cage, another way to keep me under his thumb. I took it when I ran. It's the only thing I have." My blood ran cold. This changed everything. It wasn't just a simple robbery. It was a conspiracy. And this girl, this pregnant, frightened girl, was holding the key to unraveling the whole thing. Garrison Vance wasn't just coming for her. He was coming for his freedom. He would stop at absolutely nothing to get this locket back. And what about the bounty hunter, Shaw? What would he do if he knew about this? This wasn't a simple $200 bounty anymore. This was bigger, much bigger. "We have to get rid of it," I said, my voice urgent. "Burn the letter. Throw the key in the creek." "No," she said, her chin set with a stubbornness I hadn't seen before. "This is the only thing that proves I wasn't part of it. This is the only thing that can clear my name. If I destroy it, I'm a wanted woman for the rest of my life. My baby," her voice broke. "I can't bring my child into a world where its mother is always looking over her shoulder." She was right. I knew she was right. But her courage was terrifying. It meant we couldn't run. We couldn't hide. We had to stand and fight, and we didn't have to wait long. He came at dusk. The shadows were long and treacherous, painting the world in shades of gray and black. He didn't use the path. He came up from the creek, a dark figure materializing from the trees like an ill omen. It wasn't the bounty hunter. I knew that instantly. This man moved with an arrogant, predatory stride. My blood turned to ice. It was him, Garrison Vance. I was in the barn, forking hay into the stalls. I saw the flicker of movement where none should be. Clara was in the cabin, humming a soft tune as she prepared our meager supper. She was a beacon of light in the growing darkness, and he was walking straight towards it. I didn't think. I reacted. I dropped the pitchfork I was holding and grabbed the heavier one, the one with the long, sharp tines meant for defense against wolves. Its weight was a grim comfort in my hands. I moved to intercept him, to meet him in the open yard before he could reach the cabin, before he could see her. "That's far enough," I called out. My voice came out as a low growl, an animal sound. Vance stopped. He was a silhouette against the darkening sky, tall and lean, with a cruel twist to his mouth that was visible even from 20 yards away. "I'm looking for something that belongs to me," he said. His voice was smooth and cold as a river stone. "She came this way. I've been tracking her for weeks." There's nothing for you here, I said, gripping the pitchfork so tight my knuckles turned white. Turn around and ride out. Vance laughed, a short, ugly sound that had no humor in it. You think you can stop me, old man? She's mine. Her, the locket, and the brat she's carrying. I've come to collect. He took a step forward, his hand dropping to the pistol holstered at his hip. And at that exact moment, the cabin door creaked open. Clara stood framed in the yellow lamplight, a wooden spoon in her hand. Her face was a mask of utter horror. Garrison, she breathed, the name a wisp of terror. There you are, my love, Vance sneered, his eyes locking onto her, a predator that had finally cornered its prey. Hiding behind some dirt-scratching farmer? Did you really think you could get away from me? That was all the distraction I needed. I didn't wait for him to draw his gun. I wasn't a gunfighter. I was a rancher. I was a desperate man defending his home. I lunged. I drove the pitchfork forward with all the strength I had. I wasn't aiming to kill. I was aiming to disarm, to end this before it began. Vance, surprised by the sudden, furious assault, jumped back. His pistol cleared the holster a second too late. The sharp steel tines of the fork snagged his gun belt, ripping the entire thing from his waist. The pistol went flying through the air, landing with a soft thud in the dust. Vance roared in fury. He charged, discarding stealth for pure brute force. We crashed together in the yard. It wasn't a fight of skill. It was a brutal, grunting struggle for dominance. He was younger, quicker. His fists landed with vicious precision, one catching me in the jaw, sending stars exploding behind my eyes. But I was stronger, my muscles hardened by years of hard labor. I wrapped my arms around him, lifted him off his feet, and slammed him against the side of the wooden water trough. The wood groaned under the impact. We grappled in the dirt, dust choking the air. He was like an eel, wiry and strong. He got a hand free and his fingers scrambled in the dirt, closing around a rock. He raised it, his teeth bared in a snarl, ready to bring it down on my head. Just then, a blur of motion came from the porch. Clara, her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes were filled with a ferocious resolve. She swung a heavy piece of firewood with all her might. It connected with Vance's shoulder with a sickening thud. He screamed, a high, sharp sound of pain. His arm went limp, the rock falling harmlessly from his grasp. That was the only opening I needed. I scrambled on top of him, my hands finding his throat, not to choke him, but to pin him to the earth. I put my knee on his injured shoulder, pressing down until he cried out in submission. It was over. I knelt over the panting, defeated man, my own breath coming in ragged, burning gasps. Clara stood nearby, the piece of firewood still held like a club, her body trembling, but her spirit unbroken. We had won. We were safe. But I was wrong. The night was far from over, because it was into this tableau of violent aftermath that a third man walked. He came around the corner of the barn, a rifle held loosely in his hands, his eyes taking in the scene with a cold, professional calm. He was a hard-faced man with a drooping mustache and dead eyes. Well now, the bounty hunter Shaw said, his voice as calm as a frozen lake. Looks like I missed the party. My heart, which had been hammering in my chest, seemed to stop altogether. We were trapped. We had fought off the wolf, only to be caught by the executioner. Shaw's eyes moved with a slow, deliberate assessment. He looked at the bound, groaning Garrison Vance on the ground. He looked at Clara, standing defiant with her piece of firewood. Then his eyes settled on me, the aging rancher with a bloody lip and dirt caked on his face. His gaze lingered on Clara. He pulled the crumpled wanted poster from his coat pocket, the charcoal sketch, a pale ghost in the moonlight. He compared the drawing to the living, breathing woman before him. Clara Hale, I presume, he said, his voice flat, emotionless. I got slowly to my feet, my body aching from the fight. I instinctively placed myself between Shaw and Clara. The man on the ground is Garrison Vance, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. He's the one wanted for the Willow Creek robbery. He came here to take her. He was beating her when she was with him. She ran from him. She's carrying his child. Is that a fact? Shaw said, his gaze unreadable. He looked at Vance, who was glaring up at him with pure venomous hatred. Don't listen to him. Vance spat, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. She's the snake. She set me up. She has the key, Shaw. The key to the whole score. Ask her. The reward for me is good, but the money in that box, it's 10 times that. Shaw's eyes flickered with interest. A new variable had been introduced into his calculation. He looked back at Clara. The key? Clara met his gaze. The fear was gone, replaced by a weary defiance. She reached into her dress and pulled out the silver locket. She held it out, her hand steady. He's right, she said, her voice clear and strong. There is a key, and there's a letter from his partner. Vance's eyes went wide with panic. Lies! She's lying. His partner's name is Judge Abernathy, Clara said, her words dropping like stones into the sudden silence. The circuit judge for 3 counties. The letter details how Abernathy was supposed to fix the trial for Vance's rivals in exchange for a cut of all his scores. The stagecoach robbery was just the latest. This letter proves everything. My mind reeled. A judge. This went higher than I could have ever imagined. We weren't just caught in a robbery. We were in the middle of a political conspiracy that could tear the territory apart. Shaw stood there, processing this new information. He was a businessman, a man who weighed risk and reward. The reward for Vance was $500. The reward for Clara was $200. But the information she held, that was priceless. It was also incredibly dangerous. Going after a sitting judge was a death sentence for most men, but Shaw wasn't most men. Give it to me, Shaw said to Clara, his eyes never leaving hers. Clara took a step forward. You clear my name. You tell the law that I was a hostage, a victim, that Vance forced me to go with him. You put it in your official report. It was a hell of a gamble. She was negotiating with the man who held her life in his hands. Shaw was silent for a long moment. He looked at the locket. He looked at Vance, now pale with terror. He looked at the dark, sprawling ranch, a place so far from the world of corrupt judges and stolen gold. He saw me, a simple farmer caught in the crossfire. He saw a pregnant woman fighting for the future of her child. Then he did something I never expected. He smiled, a thin, cold smile. Seems to me, Shaw said slowly, lowering his rifle, I found the outlaw Garrison Vance trying to rob an isolated ranch. This brave farmer fought him off. He nodded at me. As for the woman, he reached out and took the locket from Clara's hand. He tucked it safely into his vest pocket. Then he took her wanted poster, the one from his coat, and slowly, deliberately tore it into pieces. The scraps of paper fluttered to the ground like dead leaves. Must have been a misidentification, he said. The woman I saw on that poster didn't look anything like this lady here. He gestured with his chin towards Vance. I'll be taking him off your hands. And Judge Abernathy, well, I think he and I need to have a long talk. The law will want to thank you, Mr. Blackwood, I supplied, a wave of profound, bone-deep relief washing over me so powerfully I almost collapsed. Mr. Blackwood, Shaw repeated with a nod. He hauled a struggling, protesting Vance to his feet, binding his hands with a practiced, brutal efficiency. You two have a quiet evening. He dragged his bounty away into the darkness. The sounds of Vance's curses and threats slowly faded, swallowed by the vast, peaceful quiet of the mountains. The threat was gone. They were safe. We were safe. Clara and I stood alone in the silent yard, the echoes of violence slowly fading. She looked at me, her eyes shining in the moonlight. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. In that silent, shared look, everything was understood. We had faced the monster together, and we had won. The seasons turned. The harshness of autumn bled into the deep, isolating white of winter. But this winter was different. The cabin was not a cold, silent tomb. It was filled with the soft sounds of life, the crackle of the fire, the quiet hum of Clara singing to herself as she stitched small baby clothes, the steady, reassuring presence of another heartbeat in the house. The terror of that evening had burned away the last of our reservations, the last of our secrets. It had forged a bond of trust and reliance that was stronger than any legal document or spoken vow. The silence between us was now one of comfort, of a shared understanding that needed no words. I would watch her by the firelight, her belly growing with the promise of new life, and a feeling of profound contentment would settle in my chest. A feeling I thought had been buried forever with Martha and Daniel. I had been wrong. Love wasn't a finite resource. The heart, I was learning, had a strange and miraculous way of making room. When the snows finally began to melt, and the first green shoots of spring pushed their way through the sodden earth, Clara's time came. It was a long, difficult night. The wind howled outside, a mirror of her pain. But this time, the storm didn't feel like an enemy. I was there with her. I held her hand. I wiped her brow with a cool cloth and whispered words of encouragement, my voice steady and calm, a rock for her to hold on to. I followed her instructions. My hands, once used to the rough work of the ranch and the brutal violence of a fight, were now surprisingly gentle as I helped bring a new life into the world. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, the cabin was filled with a new sound, the lusty, angry cry of a healthy baby girl. Clara lay back against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, the tiny bundled infant cradled in her arms. She looked at me, her eyes full of a gratitude so deep it needed no expression. I looked at the child, at her perfect miniature features, her tiny fists balled up in defiance of this new cold world, and I felt a love so fierce and protective it staggered me. It was not a love that replaced what I had lost. It was a love that grew alongside it, healing the scarred landscape of my heart, like wildflowers growing over a battlefield. Weeks later, I stood on the porch, watching Clara rock our daughter in the warm afternoon sun. The ranch, once my prison of grief, was now a sanctuary. The land, once a reflection of my harsh, unforgiving sorrow, now seemed to hold a gentle promise of a future I never thought I'd have. I found a woman bathing in my creek, a fugitive with a price on her head, and in an act of reluctant mercy, in choosing to see a person instead of a poster, I had found my own redemption. I hadn't sought it. I hadn't believed it was possible. But life in its strange, unpredictable, and beautiful way had brought me a new family. I walked over and sat beside her on the porch swing. Clara leaned her head against my shoulder. The baby, our little girl, who we named Hope, made a soft, contented sound in her sleep. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. In the quiet rhythm of the swinging porch, under the vast open sky, we had built a new world. We had found a home, not on a map or on a deed, but in the shelter we provided for one another. And for the first time in a very, very long time, Arthur Blackwood felt completely and utterly at peace. This story is a reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't what we seek, but what finds us when we least expect it. If you believe in second chances, and if this story moved you, please hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe for more tales of darkness, survival, and unexpected light. Let me know in the comments below, what would you have done if you were Arthur?